The Stellar Blades drama has been ridiculous and has gone as far as to gain so much traction and momentum that corporate gaming news giant IGN has felt it necessary to issue an apology over a strange comment they made both about this game and its creator. But to make this situation even worse, more recent developments have come to light that make this whole situation appear even more unhinged, confirming many people's suspicions about the sort of people who are in charge of running big gaming news sites. If you have been following the world of gaming online this week, there is a high probability that you have run across the spicy controversy surrounding this upcoming PlayStation 5 game and the bizarre opinions from the mainstream gaming press. The most infamous of these involves IGN France and a piece put out there by the website, which would include a comment whereby the writer referred to the game's main playable protagonist as a doll sexualized by someone who has never seen a woman. Many readers would be rightly disgusted by this completely unnecessary rude comment that was directed at Stellar Blade's artist, as not only was this extremely unprofessional, but it was also a totally unfounded claim to make, especially considering that not only is the game's artist married to an extremely beautiful woman, but the character's body was modelled after a real-life woman too. The journalist would describe the character's design as highlighting an obvious bias, adding that while other games choose to highlight female characters' strengths, Eve from Stellar Blade is just bland. With this article, the writer essentially exposed his own bias and aversion to placing conventionally attractive and sexualized female characters in gaming, but paired with taking the deluded potshot at Eve's artist. These elements combined were enough to result in this piece being ripped to shreds by the masses, leading to obvious firefighting and damage control ensuing. As stated earlier, IGN has since issued an apology to try and somewhat take back control of the situation that has seemingly got out of hand. But before things could escalate that far, other steps were taken to try and diminish the writer's previous comments' significance and how we understood them. After the initial backlash from readers, the article written by the French writer would be edited to include a disclaimer affixed within it. Regarding the sexualized doll sentence and insult directed at the game's creator, it was added to read, "This last sentence has been slightly edited for French-speaking people pretending not to understand what we meant, and the English-speaking mob who Google translated the initial text." Honestly, that doesn't sound defensive and condescending at all. So, taking this patronising new addition to the article into account, could it in fact mean that the internet has been barking up the wrong tree the whole time, and that this was all no more than a communication error? Well, considering that you can't spell ignorant without IGN, rather than take the pompous journalist for his word, I instead decided to do a little bit of journalism of my very own. After all, while I had my doubts, the writer could still be correct. Maybe bad French actors were involved here, causing chaos, and our Google translation tools had let us all down, leading to us drawing the incorrect conclusion. Now, I'm both a petty and unforgiving person, and I now do not trust what's being peddled in my direction. So rather than accept that my compatriots and I, à la résistance, were potentially in the wrong and blown up a situation unnecessarily, I decided to do the next best thing. This led me to one simple solution: contact an actual living and breathing French person who can tell me what really happened. Indeed, a French friend who was completely removed from the situation and then saw what they had to say. Oh, très bon! A French friend, I might add, who was a school teacher with no connections to the world of gaming whatsoever. As you can see from his simple Facebook response, he would laugh at the original French line and refer to it as rude, but would also point out that so was the writer's pseudo-revision. Truthfully, I can't believe this turn of events. Who's ever heard of a rude Frenchman?
Get lost!
A rude Frenchman? Well, I never.
Bearing this in mind, the disclaimer was clearly nothing more than a deflection at best. Or worse, gaslighting and misinformation to present readers, YouTubers and other people criticising the situation as though they were actually the ones in the wrong and spreading false narratives. The arrogance of these people is astounding. Sacré bleu! Je pense que IGN est très ignorante. Obviously, most following this strange situation closely were able to see straight through this disingenuous tactic. So this leaves the question, what would this contemptuous company have up their sleeve to silence their detractors next? The next step taken by IGN France would be to remove the original writer's name, I'm guessing to shield him from the bombardment of criticism he has been receiving. After these continuous missteps were taken, in a rare twist, IGN actually ended up admitting some level of wrongdoing in this scenario, with the official apology we mentioned at the start of the video taking place next.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, don't hurt me, sorry.
Directing this apology towards Hyung-tae Kim, the gentleman who is not only the artist behind Eve, but also the director of Stellar Blade and the CEO of Shift Up, the company producing the game. So now you are probably wondering exactly how IGN would word their regrets. Are they truly sorry about this whole fiasco? Would they pen a beautiful and heartfelt apology, waving the white flag and recognising their misdeeds? Well, from my point of view, no. Reading the short apology put out by the company, it's full of deflections, and although acknowledging that this did indeed all happen, evidently the people in charge refused to take any actual accountability for this mess. But before we get around to spilling that tea, let's discuss the creation of the character who would provoke the IGN journalists to make such deranged and derogatory remarks in the first place. In a previous interview with Games Radar, Eve's creator Hyung-tae Kim commented that, honestly, when I play a game, I would like to see someone who is better looking than myself. That's what I want. I don't want to see something normal. I want to see something more ideal. I think that is very important in a form of entertainment. This is, after all, entertainment targeted for adults. I don't know about you, but I personally couldn't agree any more with this sentiment. Traditionally in the West for many years, this has always been the direction that entertainment as a whole was pushed in. In the majority of cases, most people prefer to look at people who are considered conventionally beautiful. I'm fed up with people acting like this is something to be ashamed of. It's not. Fair enough if it's part of your religious beliefs, but otherwise you've got no excuse to attempt to refute this basic fact. This is simple biology. Of course, some people will deviate from the norm, but the norm is the norm for a reason. Stellar Blade's director seems to think the same way as the majority of other consumers and has crafted a piece of art accordingly. However, there is currently a movement in the arts and Western game journalism pushing for bland realism and so-called representation to replace everything often seen as the more beautiful and idealistic. So it's not surprising really that the IGN journo was triggered by Eve's appearance and felt the compulsion to insult the Shift Up boss by referring to him as basically a sexless weirdo who has never been with a woman before. I often feel that people who behave in this manner are projecting their own self-esteem issues and life experiences onto others. After all, I guess people generally form their worldviews through their own lived experiences. However, this is absolutely not an excuse to behave poorly and treat other people unacceptably. Backfiring massively, it's astonishing when we look back at this fiasco that IGN would end up being forced to make more of a formal response, as it's probably not the best idea to personally insult the people who create the games they are critiquing, particularly when we take into account that insinuating the artist had never been with a woman before wasn't even based in reality. I mean, I thought it was the job of a journalist to report based on facts, even if this was just a really bad joke, which is kind of how I feel IGN France tried to frame it, is a bad joke which doesn't even make sense. IGN would start this apology with the following. Recently, IGN France produced and published a preview of Stellar Blade containing an offensive passage that should never have been kept. The text has now been edited, and here is our official apology to the Shift Up Corporation studio staff. Also, please note that IGN France is an independent branch of IGN and that IGN's editorial staff had nothing to do with this incident. So, as you can see in the first part of this apology, the IGN brand is attempting to distance itself from directly taking responsibility for the content put out by its brand, by essentially to some degree attempting to jettison the French part of the brand. But Is this even possible? Let's discuss the inner workings of how IGN operates. Starting in 2006, IGN Entertainment initiated the rollout of regional editions of its websites across multiple countries and pan-regions. Initially, IGN expanded its physical presence outside of the United States by establishing new offices to support these regional platforms. However, later on, IGN adopted a more cost-efficient approach to globalization by franchising its brand. Under this model, IGN licensed various media publishers in numerous countries to utilize the IGN brand and independently manage regional websites. These licensed regional publishers operate on their own servers, although they can connect to IGN's main database, which enables them to import or translate articles and utilize videos hosted on IGN's servers. The Americans who issued the apology might not directly manage the French side of the brand, but at the end of the day, like it or not, IGN France is still a part of IGN. So therefore, distancing themselves from IGN France is basically a load of bollocks. That's like buying a burger full of pubes from a McDonald's, tweeting about it, and then having the official McDonald's account make a statement replying, "It's nothing to do with the McDonald's brand, the branch is just a franchise." No, isn't the entire point of a franchise that there are standardized rules, regulations and procedures so that customers, or in this case readers, know what sort of product they are to be consuming? Washing their hands with it this way, in my opinion, just makes the Americans at IGN look as bad as the ones in France. I don't think their behaviour like this will endear the gaming public to trust them, which in a way makes the first portion of what they've written in their apology pointless. It could in a way make it even worse. I've always believed that if you don't believe you've done something wrong, then don't bloody apologise. Never ever should anyone behave that insincerely. There's nothing worse than simpering statements from snide, spineless losers who only say things for clout and self-preservation rather than substance and belief. These are indeed the type of people you really want to distance yourself from. As for IGN and IGN France, who needs enemies when you have friends like that? Next, they would address the controversy more directly by adding, "The original text of the Stellar Blade preview contained comments that were out of place. While it was never our intention to disrespect ShiftUp or any of its employees or their work, we recognise that the phrase taken in its literal sense was inappropriate, and we regret it. To anyone at ShiftUp Corporation who felt personally targeted and insulted by this passage, we are truly sorry and sincerely apologise." This is a very South Park BP oil spill style apology. Had they said only this without throwing their French compatriots under the proverbial bus, then this would have been an easier apology to accept. Not to mention, they haven't apologised to the thousands and thousands of people who felt alienated by the brand and will probably think twice before revisiting their website again. On a positive note for anyone who is still here, to both ShiftUp's credit and IGN France, if you take the time to actually read their Stellar Blade preview article, what makes this tale all the more tragic is that the writer, the guy in hiding, actually seems to be an otherwise talented writer and would, for the most part, provide the game with fair praise and critique. It's just a shame that the whole thing has been overshadowed by one massive faux pas when trying to score virtue points and inserting identity politics where it was not wanted or needed. Considering it made it through editing to formal publication, it makes me question whose idea it was in the first place, particularly when we added that his name would later be removed from the article. Now, originally this video was supposed to end here. However, briefly after completing writing about everything else you have heard in this crazy tale so far, multiple other YouTubers and other internet sources have just begun running with a story which, if proven to be factually correct, showcases that IGN France's editor not only despises the art style of Stellar Blade, but is blaming the look of the game for, get this, women unaliving themselves. This story has just risen to a completely different level of insanity. IGN France editor-in-chief Erwan Le Floreal reportedly went on an extreme tirade that implied that ShiftUp's character may contribute to women taking their own lives. But this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to this wannabe activist. That parkplace.com highlights his comments, which were brought to public attention by former World of Warcraft team lead Mark Kern. In now deleted comments by La Florielle on IGN France's now infamous Stellar Blade preview, Twitter user Topek899 would translate the editor's alleged comments, which combine going into detail on their honest thoughts on the character design and how damaging they believe it to be to women. After stating that women end their lives due to not being able to live up to the fictional standards expected by men, he adds, and I directly quote from the translated text, that the problem is not the sexy design itself, except that it sucks compared to others, but hey, that doesn't matter. But the percentage of males who will only want this type of fictional body in reality. Obviously, we understand that this does not shock people who think that women are objects who must obey and be beaten. This design makes us sigh and roll our eyes, and we laugh at anyone who needs it, man or woman, but that's it. The certainly clashing remark in the text, which targets the entire creative process, not necessarily a specific designer or the game director, this is obvious to anyone who knows a little French, only had this impact because a good portion of gamers have become too fragile due to being fed the patriarchy. I mean, for feck's sake, there is so much to unpack here from these posts. The man in charge of the French division of IGN clearly illustrates that he has some ultra extreme views and red hot takes on how women's representation should be in video games. When I've heard people say in the past, unhinged game journalist, I always took that with a pinch of salt and assumed this was more of a caricature because some people do tend to exaggerate, especially regarding those with polar opposite politics to them. For example, you get those people who believe anyone conservative in America is a gun-loving, God-fearing, vaccine-hating, anti-abortionist, homesteading doomsday prepper who believes every conspiracy theory they read on Facebook and that the globalists are trying to turn the frickin' frogs gay.
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
Well, I have no doubt there may very well be someone out there who is indeed like this and ticks every one of these boxes. Most people are not living, breathing stereotypes. But it does actually seem like this French editor-in-chief is the literal embodiment of the negative and bonkers stereotype that some hold about the left. Their very existence and behaviour turn speculation about the sort of people who are suspected to be in charge of these organisations with concrete evidence that there are indeed proper lunatic radicals running the show. That's not good. That's not good at all. That's very concerning. From either side of the political coin, that is really, really concerning. Speaking of this utter lunatic, I don't know what planet this guy is from, but it certainly doesn't seem to be the same one as the rest of us now, does it? For example, where is this world where men only want the type of fictional bodies seen in Stellar Blade? Now, I am sure this might exist in men's fantasies, but there is a huge difference between dreams and reality, no matter how much this Frenchman seems to struggle to separate the two. If you happen to be some kind of masochist, Erwan, and you are watching this, let me just inform you, you're a nut. You're crazy in the coconut. What does that mean? That boy needs therapy. Building on his tirade, beyond directly ridiculing and shaming all men who find the design in Stellar Blade attractive, we can also find yet another example of the publication accusing readers of not understanding the nuances of the article due to not being French speakers, which of course we debunked earlier as complete bollocks earlier in this episode. I mean, dishonest or what? Does this fella really think English speakers don't know anyone at all who can speak French, or indeed be able to speak French themselves? Excuse my French, but what le fuck? Fermez la bouche! Then of course there is also one of the most cringeworthy moments in all of this where he accuses his detractors of being fragile due to being fed the patriarchy. A cartoonishly ridiculous remark which is so hollow that it sounds like someone satirising a leftist male feminist. The only way he could have sounded any more like a stereotype is if he finished the sentence with "triggered, smash the patriarchy." But apart from all of this nonsense, the most alarming part of all of this is, of course, blaming the existence of sexy female video game characters as being responsible for women unaliving themselves. Historically, the moderate gaming community has always made fun of politicians on both ends of the political spectrum for trying to shift the blame for violence, shootings and other crimes onto video games. Traditionally, collectively as gamers, the majority have always derided these takes as preposterous comments made by boomers who have never had a particularly good grasp of reality. Out-of-touch politicians have generally always hated gaming and often try to use it as a scapegoat for real-world problems and issues. However, the fact we are at a point where game website editors also seem to have the same level of contempt for the art form and are using their platforms for activism rather than just reviewing games with as little bias as possible, well, it's no wonder now that people seem to be ditching legacy media in the droves and instead putting their trust in independent creators. Since beginning to cover this topic, I have been blown away by the amount of positive feedback that I have received from covering this topic and trying my best to give my honest thoughts and takes on the matter. Last upload, I was even fortunate enough to receive multiple super thanks and even multiple new Patreon backers. This is particularly awesome because I've been negligent in promoting my Patreon, because I've been hyper focused on ensuring that my videos are engaging and have the best possible watch retention above all else. So a really big thank you to Dracula X, Jason Fitzgerald and Mike. It's because of people like you that it's even possible for me to have an independent voice and talk about games for a living without having to submit and sell my soul to disingenuous corporate machines like IGN. You're all amazing, including the people who have supported me for a while, like these lovelies whose names are about to roll on the screen now.